There have been many times over the years where one could argue that Disney has been their own worst enemy. Whether they've missed the mark on certain movies, misread the public's perception of something, or just plain made the wrong call on any number of things, they've definitely made their fair share of mistakes since their inception. But that being said, there's one particular movie of theirs where this seems to be especially evident, since it was extremely obvious how they could have made the movie an instant classic, but instead chose to focus on all the wrong things. And the results have led to one of the most divisive and debated movies ever associated with the Walt Disney Animation Company. And there will be spoilers for the movie in question ahead. So in case you don't want to know what happens, you might just want to keep on the lookout. I won't be giving out any other spoiler warnings in this video. Okay, so to get right into it, the movie in question here is not The Black Cauldron like some of you might suspect. Because while it is true that they did arguably screw up that movie when it was obvious what they should have done with it, the movie I'm talking about is even more guilty of this. And surprisingly enough, it isn't actually a movie from the official Disney animated canon either. Though once again, the canon does have its fair share of movies that fit this mold, unfortunately, since, as I noted earlier, the Disney company is no stranger to accidental self-sabotage. But what makes the movie in question different from the others isn't just how blatantly they ignored the obvious. And this movie would be the 1977 film Pete's Dragon. And before I go any further, let me just ask, when one hears that name in reference to the original movie, what is the first, and arguably only, thing that they think of? The titular dragon. 10 years before Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out and set the standard for integrating traditional animation and live-action footage together, this movie took a typical, normal Disney story and managed to make it all the more remarkable by putting a cartoon dragon into a live-action setting. And the results are really impressive, especially for the 1970s. And even within the context of the movie, having Elliot be traditionally animated just helps make him feel all the more like a kid-friendly guardian to Pete and more easily evokes that childlike feeling of wonder. In other words, had the dragon been stop motion or a puppet, he probably wouldn't be nearly as intriguing or interesting to watch. So the point is, when one watches this movie, they are most definitely watching it for Elliot. And anytime he isn't on screen, they're just waiting for him to appear again. But the irony here is, he almost wasn't even in the movie at all. Originally, he was supposed to be invisible the entire movie, with only such scenes as him breaking into the schoolhouse or the townspeople dropping a net on him at the climax, giving the audience any idea of what he looks like. But then the executives decided to have Elliot actually be seen at the end of the movie, and thus commissioned Don Bluth to animate him for that one scene. Only, in an early display of his genius and understanding of audiences, Bluth and the other animators working on the film argued that Elliot should be seen more throughout the movie, since even at that stage, he arguably was the main attraction. And though they were reluctant to give the go-ahead, they eventually decided to let Elliot be seen periodically when it was argued that the audience would get, quote, impatient if they had to wait until the net falls on him at the climax just to get a rough idea of what he actually looks like. So in the end, his screen time was increased to a total of 22 minutes all throughout. But while all of this was going on, something else was also happening to the script. It was being changed into a full-blown children's musical. Because originally, the movie was supposed to be a straightforward story of a boy and his invisible dragon friend who gets him both into and out of trouble, with only one song that was to be sung, which was Candle on the Water. However, the executives were so impressed with the song that they decided to turn the movie into a musical and commissioned more songs to be written. And in the end, that proved to be a huge mistake. Because once the movie came out, everybody had more or less the exact same take on it. That Elliot the Dragon stole the entire movie, and that the musical numbers not only went on for far too long, but that there were also way too many of them. So simply put, while Don Bluth and the other animators had to fight tooth and nail for the best part of the movie to even be put in the movie in the first place, the executives easily gave the green light for arguably the worst aspect of it. Because the thing is, even most musical lovers can agree that this movie would have been better off not being a musical, because the songs simply aren't good or epic enough to justify them eating up so much screen time, especially for a movie that most are going to see for the dragon in the first place. But what also makes this especially egregious is that general audiences had lost interest in big budget musicals back in the late 1960s. So the executives should have known that making a 2-hour children's musical in the late 70s, where successful musicals were still a rare fluke, was not a good idea. But it seems that after hearing just one good song, they thought they could make the next Mary Poppins out of it. Though they clearly forgot that Mary Poppins had two things going for it that Pete's Dragon didn't. One, Walt Disney's personal involvement, as well as the freaking Sherman Brothers writing the music. And two, the pleasure of being released when epic, big-budget musicals were all the rage. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what's my point with all of this? That simply put, Pete's Dragon was unwittingly set up to fail. Because if the executives had been smart, they would have featured Elliot front and center for most of the movie, had a shorter running time, and no musical numbers. And had they done that, the movie would have probably not only done better when it was released, but it would also more likely be well regarded today. But instead, they focused on all the wrong things, wanting to keep Elliot unseen as much as possible and turning the whole thing into an ill-advised musical. You see what I mean about Disney being their own worst enemy in a case like this? Though some would argue that the movie was never going to do well, since it had the misfortune of going up against the original Star Wars. But the point is that all of these poor decisions on the executive's part didn't do it any favors. Like I said before, only the likes of Don Bluth, Ken Anderson, and the other animators knew what kind of movie this should have been. And the best thing about it is that they got the higher-ups to even partially agree with them. Because here's the thing, as I touched on before, people love watching traditionally animated characters interact with live-action stuff. There's just a novelty to it, a kind of magical quality that nothing else can quite replicate. So the decision to have Elliot, a mythical dragon that's meant to represent every child's imaginary friend and guardian angel, be brought to life that way was honestly the best thing they could have done for him, because he's able to evoke those feelings flawlessly. And it's because of him that the movie is even remembered at all today. Otherwise, it would have just been your run-of-the-mill, slightly below average musical. But where Elliot is concerned, he's able to elevate the movie to a much higher level with his mere presence alone. And instead of musical numbers, that is what they should have been focused on. Because despite not even wanting to put him in the first place, Elliot completely steals the movie, and the 22 minutes he's on screen are almost universally considered to be the best parts of the movie, and for some the only reason to watch it at all. But once again, the executives just couldn't see the obvious. The key to this movie's success was right in front of them, and they completely overlooked it. Because while the final product is okay, apart from Elliot obviously, if they just hadn't made it a musical, shortened the runtime, and placed Elliot center stage for as long as possible, then Pete's Dragon would most definitely be much more fondly remembered today. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Pete's Dragon is one of the worst examples of Disney being their own worst enemy, since what they should have done with the movie was extremely obvious from the start? Or do you believe the movie's fine and that there are even worse examples of that out there? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. But please remember, you do not have to agree with this video just because you watched it. You can feel absolutely any way you want to about both Disney and Pete's Dragon. And if you think the movie is perfect the way it is and nothing could have made it better, that is completely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really very appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.